In the last video, I showed you how to get Loady animations working on your Pinegrow page using the Body Move-In plugin hosted by a CDN. So far in our scripts, we've just added autoplay to our animations to make them play when the page is loaded. However, we can also use Pinegrow Interactions to make the animations a little bit more responsive to what the user is doing on the page. So let's start by, instead of auto-playing the top animation, making it play on scroll. So the first step will be to edit our script to turn autoplay off. So again, we have a script that's calling a function within the library, the Loady min.js library, to load that animation and play it. I've got it selected here on the page. If we go to the element code panel, that'll open up here. And at this point, we can go ahead and change this to, instead of being autoplay true, to autoplay false. Now, if we refresh the page, we'll see that our rocket ship continues to play down there, but our happy ox has stopped playing. So that's the first step. So next, we need to actually add interactions onto this page. So we can do that by going to our interactions panel and then clicking on Activate Interactions. We should now see that on the page we have this pgia.js library. That's the Pinegrow Interactions library loaded onto our page. If you don't see that, then you can also do this manually by going to File, Manage Libraries and Plugins, and then going to this interactions library right here, and in this case it wouldn't be active. Clicking on Activate, that'll ask you if you want to copy those resources to the page, and you just say yes. So going back to the interactions, in this case I think we want to this one, we want to go ahead and add a scroll scene. So first things first, let's make sure that that this is selected. So if you click on the Loady itself, you'll see that you get this funky looking little menu here. And that just indicates that this element is being added dynamically to the page through JavaScript, and that you have limited ability to edit it. So instead you have to actually pick the enclosing div. So basically this div here that we gave the ID of Loady1. Going back, now that it's selected, to our interactions, we can click on scroll scene. That'll go ahead and add this this scroll scene with animation. So we're going to leave the auto detect alone. I'm going to go ahead and just show the markers right here, and we'll come to this later. And then we're going to open up this start and end under the advanced in order to say where we want it to scroll from and to. So from this drop down, rather than leaving it as default, we're going to select describe. So for the describe, what we want now is we want that as soon as the user starts scrolling the page, that this animation starts. And so the way that we can do this is we can say that we want to start animation when the scene's element reaches the start of the start of the body, which is what we're going to target here. And then we're going to, instead of having it start when it's all the way up here, we're just going to move that start down by changing this offset to be right at the top of the scene element. And so now to select the body, we can go into this input, and the easiest way is to go to Edit Selector, and then we're going to select the body. And the way you do that is you $, to say that you're putting in some special selector, body. So you can see that that is a gray color. So if I had forgotten that $, basically Pinegrow wouldn't know what it was targeting, and it's going to turn that orange. So if you see your indicator turning orange, if you see your input turning orange, that means that Pinegrow is sensing an error and you need to correct that. So we'll change that back. $body. Okay. And then we're going to bring, again, that start down by about 100 pixels. That should compensate for our menu, the width of this menu, plus this little bit of padding here on top. And so you can see now our marker for the scroller start is here, just above the start of this element. So when that element edge hits the scroller start, that's when we want our animation to start. So we're now going to tell it when we want it to end. Basically, there's no point in continuing the Loady animation once this element exits the page. So we're going to say that when the end of this element, so places the marker here, reaches the scroller's start. So basically, it's going to scroll up and keep the animation going all the way up until that end hits this scroller end at the very top. So we're not adding in any offset, so it's not going to stop here. It's going to stop up here at the start of the body. Because we already have the selector placed into the start, that same selector will be placed into the end, so we don't have to add it in here as well. All right, so right now, this is good for the start and the end. I'm going to come back in a second to this once we add in the animation. So if we go down here now and add an animation, we can choose if we want to go ahead and add a name. We don't have to. And then for animation, we're actually going to do a custom animation. You can just click on Edit Animation and it'll put that in there. And so now we go down here and we're going to go ahead and click right at the beginning. And that will give us a new transition. So now we can add in our animation. For type, we're going to leave it as tween. I'm going to set this back to 0. I had to click off just a little bit to get the orange plus sign to appear. And then you can use any kind of, any number for duration, because it's actually going to be controlled simply by scrolling and the distance between the scroll start and the scroll end. And duration really isn't going to have an impact. We'll just put it to 1 for ease. Speaking of ease, so basically you can have all sorts of different easing properties. But if you just want to do a standard straight animation where it starts playing when you start scrolling and stops when you're done, use linear ease none. And then finally, I'm going to go down to add property. I'm going to go down to Loady. So if we just want the animation to start playing, we'd select play, but we actually want it to play the frame that corresponds to our scroll position. So we're going to use Loady seek. Okay, so that should be it. So now if we scroll up and down, we can see that our animation starts playing. Can't really see it end, but basically it should. So going back to one other little change we have to make. So right now you can see that our start is at the top of the element and our end is at the end of the element. Remember that this is a dynamically loaded element. So if we now go ahead and refresh our page, we see something funny. And that's that our end pin jumps up here to the start. And if we look once again, we can see that's because that's the size of that outer container when it doesn't have the Loady animation loaded in. So what happens is that it takes just a little bit for the Loady animation to come in, and until that point, our element size is smaller, and that's where the Pinegrow Interactions, when it scans the page, places our end point. So it starts at the start of the element just fine, but it places at the end of the element without the Loady animation. So the other thing that we have to do in order to make this work out correctly is we have to go ahead and put in an actual size to this element so that we know where the end should be. So Pinegrow helps us out with this. With the element added in, loaded in, we can see that the size of this whole element is 450 pixels by 450 pixels. So what we can do is, with this selected, go into our style panel and then go ahead and make sure that it has a hard-coded size of 450 pixels. And we're going to add the same for width just to make sure. It's not going to actually change anything. You can also, I should point out, go ahead and set these using view height to make it more responsive if you feel you need to have it change size on a phone or something like that. Because the Loady animation is SVG, it'll properly size to whatever container you place it into. So we're just going to go ahead and restart that. Now you can see with the refresh that our start is at the start, our end is at the end. So we basically compensated for this dynamic element. If we turn the JavaScript off, we can also see that we no longer get the shift in the size of the content due to this not dynamically loading in. Okay, and we can see as we move, our cow dances back and forth quite nicely. Excuse me, our ox. Adding other types of interactions follows the same steps as for the scroll scene. First, edit the script to turn autoplay off, then select the container for the animation and add the interaction. For our second animation, we'll have it play when the user moves the mouse over it. So first, go back to the page, go down to the correct script, open our code panel, then from within this, we're just going to turn that autoplay off. Going back now to our DOM tree, make sure that this container is selected. So again, had an ID of Loady2. Then we'll go to interactions. And this time we're just going to click interactions, not a scroll scene. So again, you can give it a name. So for example, you can name it Loady2. Then we're going to go down to our trigger. And for our trigger, we're going to select mouse and touch. And then we're going to select mouse move, touch move. So that's going to allow us to change the position or change the animation based on how the user's mouse is moving at the time. Once we set that trigger, we'll get an action panel. And in this case, we can either choose to animate the X or animate the Y or animate the distance from the center. I'm going to choose Y. This will cause the Loady animation to play forwards as the mouse moves down, and the image down the image, and backward as it moves up the image. You can also choose to animate based on left to right movement by selecting Animate X. You can also choose to animate just based on where the mouse is within the image using distance from center. And depending on what your animation is, one of these might work better for you than another. All right, and also remember that you can change the target of the trigger to be even larger than just the animation. So if you move the mouse over here, you could also have this move by, for example, selecting this entire section as the target for the trigger, as opposed to just the animation itself. Okay, so we can leave the rest of these boxes empty and then click on the Edit Animation. That'll bring up a new timeline for our animation that we can add a transition to. Again, click on that timeline to add the transition. Leave the type as tween once again, position of 0, and any duration you want, because again, we're going to be controlling based on our mouse, not on the overall length of the animation. Basically, the duration or how fast the animation runs will be set by the width or the height of this particular element. So it will set the animation to run completely if you take your mouse all the way from the top down to the bottom. Next, we're going to add a property. I'm going to go to here to Loady, and again, select Seek. And that's it. So now if we check, if we move our mouse up and down, it moves that animation up and down. So maybe this overall speed isn't quite what we want. Maybe we want the animation to play multiple times as we navigate over the height of this div. So what we can do is we can just go ahead and duplicate this transition on the timeline. So we can copy it, then hover over the end, say paste here. So now what we can see is that it plays a little faster because it's going to play through that animation twice as we move from the top to the bottom of that div. Again, depending on what animation you select, playing it multiple times might work a little better for the overall page. So as with other interactions, apply to many can also be used to trigger Loady animations. In this case, I'm going to replace each of the SVG elements here within the this services section to be little Loady files and to run with the scroll of the scene. So I'm going to just go ahead and speed up the overall tutorial and just do this sort of semi-offline. But basically, again, I downloaded the JSON files. I'm going to add unique IDs to each of the sections that hold these current SVGs. And then I'm going to go ahead and place scripts on the page to animate those particular or load in those particular Loady animations. Okay, so now we can see that we have our different new Loady Loady animations loaded in here. I think I might have gotten this one and this one mixed up from what I have on my final page, but that's fine. There's no real need to have these in the exact same order. The other thing that you might have noticed as I was going along is that I actually already had the IDs added onto these. So after I deleted that SVG off, I had already from previously gone over into properties and added that unique ID of Loady 3. So the other thing that I had to do to make sure that the SVG animation displayed the size that I wanted to was to put onto these containers a size of 146 by 146. And that gave me the size that I wanted. I could have, again, put this any size, and that Loady animation that I put in there would size appropriately to the overall container. Okay, so for this one, we're going to use apply to many with a scroll scene. So we're actually going to first add an interaction to this element. Okay, so to do that, we're just going to go and since it's already selected, we're going to go to the interactions panel and select scroll scene. So what we want to happen is we want the animation to start when this first comes into the page, and then we want it to end when it exits the page. So in order to do this, again, like before, we're going to describe the start and the end. And this is from a past animation that it auto-populated with. Sorry about that. But what we're actually going to want to do is start when the scene elements start. So the very beginning of this actually reaches the end of the body. So we want it down here. So right now I didn't turn off the last markers. If we show these markers, we'll see that our start is here, our end is here. So that's the right now is the whole height of that element. And then we right now have the scroller start down here. So when that start touches the scroller start, it's going to start the animation. And what we can see is that's actually not quite right, because we're going to start our animation before it's actually in the scene. We actually don't want it to start till it's maybe like about here. And so again, to do that, we're going to add an offset. In this case, instead of moving it down the page, we want to move it up the page. So we're going to give it a negative offset. Let's try about 100 pixels. It's not too bad. We maybe could start that a little sooner, but for right now, let's leave it at that. Just as a reminder, again, this auto-populated for me, but if you need to put this selector in, you click on the box, go to Edit Selector, make sure you put a $sign before the body so that it knows the correct element to select. Okay, now we have to set when we want the animation to end. And remember, we're doing an apply to many. So as we scroll up the page, we're going to animate all 4 of these Loady animations, and we want to make sure that the animations keep occurring until those last 2 scroll off the end. So there's a couple different ways that we could do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say that I want this to end when the start of the next section. So I'm going to go ahead and select this on the page, make sure that the next section is highlighted and click, hit done. So I'm going to say when the start of that comes onto the page and reaches basically the scroller's start, that it should stop. So right now, basically you can see that when the start goes ahead and hits this scroller start, our progress meter starts filling. So it's about 2% now with this movement. And now as it goes up the screen, you can see that it's still at about 60% with these in. And then by the time we get to the scroller end, it's at 100%. So this is one way to do it. Another way we could do it is instead we could change this to be the end of, and then we can select this on the page instead. So we can select the end of this section. And then we can even do something like scroll up till we see that these are off the page, and then go ahead and bring that down to say we want the scroll to end there. So that narrows down where our scroll is going to occur. Okay, now let's go ahead and add the animation. So we've got the start and end set. Again, we can name the animation. We don't have to select an element since it's going to be this element that's already selected. Click on the Edit Animation to bring up a new timeline. Go ahead and click to add a transition. Like before with the scroll scene, we can leave the type set to tween, the position to 0. We can do anything we want with the duration. So let's go ahead and change it to 1 if we want. We can set the linear ease, or the ease to linear ease none. That just means that the animation will start and end linearly rather than having some power function. And then add property, Loady, Loady seek. And so we can see as we scroll now, our gears nicely rotate. And we can't see them, but they're still rotating up there. So now what we have to do is we have to take and add this animation that we just made to all of the rest of the elements here. So to do this, we'll go to our Interactions panel, and we'll select Apply to Many. So that brings up a new target panel. You can see I actually already have a target in there from previous construction of this page, and I'll show that to you. So if we look I'm choosing to target each of these different animations using their unique IDs. So I don't have to put in the target of the very first one. I only need to put in the target for whatever other animations I want to target. And so remember to use unique IDs or to use parts of the page. We add a $sign. You only have to add it once to let Pinegrow know that the following portions are going to be targets. And so I want to target the div with the ID of Loady4. So I precede it with a hash. So hash Loady4. Then I use a comma to tell Pinegrow that I want to target another element, hash Loady5. So the div with the element with the ID of Loady5, comma hash Loady6. So now with that new target added in, all of these should run their animation when we scroll up and down. Probably need a refresh first. And so now we can see that as we scroll up and down, we get the gears turning, but we also get this pyramid thing kind of rotating. We get the search icon changing over into either an X or a close or a search icon. And this guy pulses along nicely. So again, Pinegrow will automatically fit the length of the animation to the overall size or the distance between the start and the end. If you want these animations to run more quickly, like this pulse is pretty hard to notice, you can add in more transitions and it will basically squish or stretch any of those transmissions to fit the distance of the scroll.